Hey guys, back with another fun-filled episode of economics right here at good old Lawrence County High School. We're going to start off today by looking at different economic systems, and we have this clever little graphic here I want you to look at. Communism, you have two cows. The state takes both and gives you some milk. Socialism, you have two cows, you give one to your neighbor. That's a Bernie cow. Fascism, you have two cows, the state takes both and sells you some milk. And then lastly, bureaucratism. You have two cows, the state takes both, shoots one, milks the other, and then throws the milk away. I'm not really certain where they're going with that one, but someone smarter than me made this cute little graphic. So let's really break it down and look at economic systems. And we're going to look at, really, economists acknowledge that we have four basic economic systems that exist out in the world. And all four of these systems, which we'll look at today, have to do the following things. All economic systems have to answer three basic questions. Now, I think in your crash course videos that you've been watching, they touched on this and they kind of danced around a little bit, but for sure you need to know this. Number one, economic systems have to decide what goods will be produced. Doesn't matter which system you're looking at, they all have to figure out what are we going to produce. The second thing that all economic systems have to answer is, how should they be produced? And the last thing, who will get the goods? So no matter what we're talking about, no matter which economic system, be it capitalism, well, I shouldn't say capitalism, free markets, command economies, and we'll look at that in a second. What goods will be produced? How should they be produced? Who will get them? And to say that in a real basic way, it's really saying, what are we going to make? How are we going to make it? And who's going to get it once we've had it made? And what we'll see is all these different economic systems have different ways that they address these three questions, which have to be addressed. So when we look at our four types of economic systems, number one is what economists call a traditional economy. In a traditional economy, it's a system based on custom or tradition. These have been going on for sometimes centuries. We think of them as low technology agriculture or just hunters and gatherers. We would probably find most traditional economies in third world or underdeveloped countries. So really we're just talking about people who are trying to survive. They don't have much technology, they're just trying to find food out in the wild to eat it, or maybe they're chasing tigers with sticks, trying to kill them so they can eat a tiger. I don't know how that would work out. Usually in a traditional economy, we say that they have full employment, and think about that. If your job is just to simply survive, you're probably out there involved in the hunt or you're trying to grow food. So everyone has a job, and we think there's a low crime rate. I typically think that these types of economies, people wouldn't have lots of material goods, and since there's not much to steal, probably the crime rate's quite low. So if we think about the old systems like this, where people are just out in the field plowing with oxen, I even think about maybe tribes of Aborigines, or there's still tribes in Africa where people are just running around trying to survive and they're just isolated from the rest of the world. The Amish, would we put the Amish in this category? And I'm not really sure if we would or not. They do use technology, even though it's not necessarily the technology that the rest of the world is using. So I don't really know if we would say that the Amish are part of the economic system of traditional economies or not. That's for, I don't know. If we were in class, we would discuss it. A second type of economic system is called a market economy or free market. Now I put both these terms up here because you'll see different books and different articles say the same thing in different ways. A market economy or a free market economy means the same thing. So here, businesses produce goods based on consumers' needs. Now think about it. Who are consumers? We are. Anyone who buys something is a consumer. So businesses, factories, companies make what we want to buy. Do we want to buy this? I know 10 years ago, everyone wanted to buy Elmo, and grandmas were fighting in the aisles of Walmart to try to get it. Are we still wanting Elmo? Is this something in demand? How many of you actually have an Elmo at your house? So I don't know if we're really manufacturing this anymore. And look, it says Toys R Us. You remember that? This is a Nintendo's 2600. This was the gaming console of my generation. Are factories still making this? Do people still want this? I remember a couple of years ago at Walmart, you could buy just this one little joystick, and that's all it was, and it had all the games that Nintendo ever had on it back in this period. So you could argue that there are people who are nostalgic about old video games that want this, but for the most part, we don't want this. So I don't really know how much these things are being manufactured, because is this really what consumers want? A third economic system, I'm sorry, we're still on free market. In a free market, markets determine who will get the goods. That's to say, we set up places where people can go and there will be a price involved, and the price level, we'll talk about how price levels are set later, but that price determines who gets the good or service. So if you're willing to pay the money that the market sets the price at, then you can get the good or service. The government is not involved in the economy, in a free market economy. Now I think this becomes more hypothetical than anything in the year 2020, but if we really want to say this is a free market economy, then the government will not be involved. And you can make an argument, maybe the United States during the Industrial Revolution might have been a free market economy. Think about the pictures and images we've seen where factories were hiring children to work and they were paying them next to nothing in very dangerous working conditions. The government didn't regulate at all what was going on. So factories were very dangerous. They worked their workers very long and hard hours. There was a lot of pollution going on because there wasn't any regulation, and I'm sure lots of toxic chemicals got dumped out into the streets or the creeks or wherever. So I don't really know. I'm certain we don't really have a free market now, but at some point, and once again, this hypothetical free market where the government's not involved at all. A third type of economic system would be a command economy. In a command economy, the government makes all economic decisions, such as what to make, what the prices will be, and how much people will be paid. So we typically think about the Soviet Union as being the model of a command economy, and it wasn't a very good model because we see that this economic system typically doesn't fare very well. Other places that at some point either had the command economy or maybe is still trying to run it. The Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, Cuba, I guess we could throw North Korea into that situation. And think about this. This is where governments decide what factories will make. So the government had to have some minister of goods who would say, all right, here are the things that we need to purchase or that we need to produce for our people in our country. Not what do the people want, this is what we're going to make. And they also had to determine this is how much it will cost. And what we see if you really study how the Soviet Union pretty much self-destructed because of the system is that this is not the best way to determine what people want to buy. That's where markets do quite well to determine, we're not going to put all of our money into making Elmos because people don't want Elmos. But yet the Soviet Union made lots of stuff and just said, here it is, go buy it. And that typically didn't work. This is also called central planning sometimes because all the decisions about the economy, the planning is made centrally from the government itself. So it's not like producers and consumers are getting together saying this is what we're going to make. The government is telling you what you're going to make. So in a command economy, just to recap, what to make, how to make it, and who's going to get it is all determined by a central authority, which would be the government. Lastly, let's look at something called a mixed economy. And you can figure out what it's going to do is it's going to take parts of the free market and parts of some government intervention to have a mixed market. Economic decisions are made by business based on consumer demand, so that's the free market part. But the government also makes decisions in which they do the following things. They regulate trade. Let's think about that for a second. There are certain things that you and I aren't allowed to purchase because the government says we can't buy those, and I'm certain you can think of some of those things. Sometimes you can't buy things if you're not of a certain age, or things are going to have taxes placed upon them, so the government is involved. Protection of workers. There are lots of rules now that make workplaces safe and protect workers. So if you're working underground in a coal mine, or if you're working some job which is extremely dangerous, I'm sure the government has come in and said these are the things you have to do to protect your workers. We have to protect the environment. So factories can no longer dump lots of toxic things out into the environment. It's cheaper for companies to do that because it's really expensive to properly get rid of toxic waste. But we decided that we want to protect the environment to a degree, and there's always trying to find that balance of how much is enough protection. But if you look at what we say is a mixed economy right now, it's really the United States. And here's where this gets interesting. We like to say we're a free market economy. compared to like the Soviet Union, China, or all those other systems, we say we're free market here, and we only produce what American citizens want to buy. And in a sense, we are free market, but the reality of it is we're a mixed economy, because the government is clearly involved and has been for the last 100 years to a large degree. So even though it gets confusing that we like to stand up and say America's a free market economy, we're really a mixed economy. So you look at your four economic systems, and you have a traditional economy where people are basically just trying to survive, and it's the same way they've been trying to survive for the last 100, 200, 300 years. You have a command economy where the government is basically in control of everything. You have a free market economy where there's really no government involvement, and just what producers and consumers decide should be purchased or should be produced is what will be produced. And lastly, a mixed economy, where it's a lot like a free market because manufacturers are producing what we want, but there is some government regulation. So that wraps up what we'll talk about today. Don't forget to go online and take the quiz. I'll come back at you Friday with another video. We'll discuss some other topic. Wash your hands, social distance, and I'll see you tomorrow.